So the article reads as thus: police will now be able to access track and trace information on people instructed to self-isolate. Those who fail to self-isolate face fines between £1,000 to £10,000. This latest government action will have disproportionate impact on Black and brown communities and those from lower income backgrounds, in particular migrants, who have already been bearing the brunt of COVID-19. Police access to track and trace information is just another way the carceral state has infiltrated the healthcare and immigration systems in this country. Instead of addressing the systemic inequalities fueled by white supremacy, Black and brown people, migrants, and those from lower income backgrounds are seen as disposable. What of those who simply cannot self-isolate? Why are we criminalising those who feel the necessity of having to go out and work because of the very real fear of becoming destitute? This is worse for migrants who have no recourse to public funds, which means they cannot access any government help, including universal credit. Nearly 1.4 million cannot access public funds due to their immigration status, yet the demand to access government help has doubled since March. The police use of Motorola's Pronto software, police reporting and notebook organiser, which all includes biometric fingerprint app, which connects police and immigration databases, has been updated with COVID-19 penalty functions. This is the result of emergency police powers granted by the new coronavirus bill on March 26, 2020. This new development compounds the unequal impact of the pandemic with the discrimination and lack of account embedded in police technologies given under the coronavirus bill, and found that Asian people received at least 13% of penalty fines, even though they only represent 7.8% of the population. So that's 13% fines, but only 7.8% of the population. And Black people were issued 5% of the fines, despite only being 3.5% of England's populations. How are we to trust the police who are institutionally racist with our data? So if we bring Penny back in, I've got a few questions for you here on this quite big piece. And, you know, certain people, they'd find hearing this information discomforting. So let's start off with some of the awkward questions here. And let's say, you know, surely the track and trace system is needed and the police need to be involved to help enact the tracing and enact, you know, the fines to ensure that people self-isolate when due. You know, what is the answer to this? Should we be moving to more local institutions and avoiding big central institutions like government and big corporations? Or shouldn't we just accept that really the police are the best people for the job and kind of ignore this data?
I think, yeah, the historically, again, I feel like I've used the word historic of quite a few times, and I will do again, because having seen what the police have done with data, not just stop and search, stop and scan, as probably later on talk about it, I don't think they're the best people to handle this stuff. But it's also this push that we have from not just the government, but institutions nationally to grant powers to an institution that's already quite powerful to become not judge and jury, but also capable of enacting more harm to communities. So this particular, obviously the piece that we've just spoken about, we've seen people who've been stopped. I think it was 54% at one point in terms of the numbers. There was more recent data in London that showed how many Black people had been stopped, which is higher than when we wrote that article a little way back, which means you're giving power to, or more authority to, people who are already quite powerful. And because of that historical kind of institutional racism that exists within the police, they're doing more harm. So the biometric that you just mentioned, obviously that access to the Home Office, which has been a campaign that we're working on Stop the Scan, means they have even more access. They can pick somebody up in the street and send them off to, you know, to lock them up. But what we've seen, for example, we're based in Leeds, or in West Yorkshire, should I say, but the communities who've been targeted, for example, the Roma community, are people, I don't even know whether the data is not come out yet, I don't think, but they're the people who haven't got jobs to kind of be furloughed. They do on a kind of day-to-day basis, which means they have to continuously go out. The people who are on lowest, as we've seen with all these campaigns that have been going on about For example, the key workers, the people who are likely to be key workers are people in a lower socioeconomic conditions or background, which has meant these powers are likely to affect those communities most. People who are working in the grey economy, not just, for example, not just car washes, but anything that means they have to go out. The numbers you've spoken about, 1.4 million not able to access benefits, not able to be supported by the government as it has done other people in the community, means somebody has to provide for that family, somebody has to pay rent, somebody has, because nobody else will, somebody has to provide uniform, somebody has to do all of these things, which, and when they don't have any other alternative in terms of a buffer, then they'll go out to work, and here we are finding them. So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the numbers are saying who's out there, but also the situations that these communities live in. We were giving examples to the police just the other week that most people are perhaps overpopulated in terms of the housing that they have. They probably have more, in the number of people living in one household. They probably don't have back gardens. They probably don't have even television. And again, this is another story when you talk about people who are seeking asylum, people who are destitute. They don't have anything to stay in and A, do the telecommunications, B, to even entertain them or keep them busy. So when they come out in the streets and a neighbor rings up the police and then the police come and give them fines that cannot afford to pay, it becomes that kind of whole cycle. So the question on whether the police are the right people to do this, the answer is no. There could have been other ways. I know we've spoken about defunding the police in different measures, and it's not saying we want, it's saying that they should, that money, that power, that whatever else that they're being given to, could be given to somebody else in the community, to other people in the community who are likely to engage with them on a one-to-one basis without necessarily the consequences of which could lead to, the consequences could be quite dire.
Well, I mean, and that's astonishing. But one of the things that was astonishing to me, to come back to that 1.4 million number, is how can that number be so large? Is that all due to immigration status? Because I'm aware that there's a large amount of people in the grey economy, but is that all due to immigration status? And if so, how is this number so large and so unreported? You know, in some circles, they're going to be asking, how on earth are people living in the country without being able to access the benefits of the state? Could you explain a bit of what the background is for this large population?
Sure. The people who have no, I think the partly why it's not so documented could be to do with the fact that right-wing press and media and politicians continue to kind of take advantage of saying people are coming here to take from them. So there's the assumption that people who come here get access to everything else that the rest of the citizens get, which is not true. So, for example, students on visas, people who've come here on marriage visas as well, people who are going through the asylum process, people who haven't got indefinite stay to stay in this country, all fall under that bag. We know there's actually worse situations, for example, and again, this is a bill that's been going through more recently around domestic abuse. So people who haven't got legal status to stay in the country, if you're experiencing domestic abuse, you cannot access the refugees or domestic violence places that people go for safety, and that's a rule. So and that's just one of them. There's many more in terms of whether you have access to secondary mental health. But when we come back to, so the numbers are large and probably even larger because there is also undocumented migrants who perhaps not even known of their existence in this country. So when you're not legally, or not even legally, because you are legally here even when you're on a visa, but because you haven't got the citizenship or status regularized in a way where you're able to access, it means you have got no protections. So for those people who are perhaps here for 1 year and then they've been furloughed or they've been made redundant, the jobs have ended, it means they have nothing else, and that's why the numbers are so large. And I think there is a call for people to know more about these communities. Some of the campaigns that we started just this year around COVID was to ask that question about who is aware of these communities who not only have difficulty, haven't got the digital devices to access and go online and keep updated with the messy messages we've been getting on what we should and should not do around COVID. Some of them haven't got the devices, but there's also things like language barriers. There's also things like computer literacy barriers. So, and when everybody was told, ring up your council and ask for food and we'll drop food parcels, where is the social aspect of people who, for example, have migrated? And we work with people like who have migrated, who are going through the asylum process as a single woman or a single man, hasn't got family, and the only place that they had or access to was a center that they drop off like once a month or once a week, should I say. And then suddenly all these places were shut. Where is that social support? And then on the back of that, we have the hostile environment, which means a lot of those communities, Black and brown communities, migrant communities, and also poor communities, are quite fearful of authority, whether it's the police because of this data sharing stuff that they do with the Home Office, whether it's the local councils, whether it's the social services. So nobody's coming forward. So when we were asking, how are we catering for these communities who are continue to be invisible, even though they're quite large in our numbers around where we are? Who's asking this question? So yeah, so it is quite large and it's concerning. And I think for me, the call is for people to know more about this and also continuously think about how do we change, because we still have what I call apartheid in terms of laws and rules, where we have one rule for everybody else in terms of people who are here, who are citizens, and then another rule for everybody else. And why do we have that, especially when we're going through a crisis that we have right now in this world, the pandemic?